Hey guys, welcome back. Nanox today. I wanted to present to you what I heard and what I thought about the presentation by Nanox at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. So that presentation took place at 9:10 a.m. Eastern Time today. Their CEO presented about a half an hour long presentation with multiple slides. This video is not going to take a half an hour. We'll just break down what I thought were the important parts of that. So I have gone over the Nanox technology in previous videos, but if you haven't watched those, Rand Poliakine, the CEO, just quickly presented what Nanox Vision was for their company. Essentially, they say that there's an unmet need in 2/3 of the world's population, and this company is really looking to provide medical screening as a software. They call it MSaaS. To do that, they've invented a cold cathode X-ray tube that they can produce at infinitely smaller cost than a normal X-ray tube, and they are trying to deploy this X-ray tube within something that they call the Nanox Arc, this bluish gray device that you can see over here on the right. So what do I think of this MSaaS model? Well, in theory, the concept sounds good, except for the fact that there are not a lot of screening tests that are done by medical imaging in asymptomatic patients. You know, generally, screening means asymptomatic. We don't tend to screen people who are already symptomatic. I can think of a few indications to do medical screening. One certainly is mammography to detect breast cancer. Another is low-dose CT to evaluate for lung cancer in patients who are high risk, who have a long history of smoking. And a third might be coronary artery calcium detection, which is done by CT and has some correlation for coronary artery atherosclerosis and risk factors. Rand covered the Nanox technology and how they go about producing X-rays, comparing that to the current system, which has been in place for about 100 years, involving heating up a filament and producing electrons, which are then bounced off an anode and create X-rays. I covered this in more detail in my first Nanox video. I would encourage you to go back and look at that if you're curious about the technology. But this is what their device looks like. It's a tiny silicon chip with millions of tiny little nano cones from which the electrons can emerge. He also showed some of the images that their X-ray tube can take compared to a current commercial device. These are side-by-side comparisons. Now, the kilovolt peak that you can see up here, this essentially describes the strength of the beam. A smaller patient requires less kilovolts. To penetrate through a larger patient or larger object would require more kilovolts to penetrate through to a detector. The milliamps has to do with how many X-rays are being produced. It can affect the quality of an image as well as the radiation exposure that a patient receives. If you notice these two side-by-side images, they're not quite equal. The one here on the right from a commercial device, in my eye, is actually a little bit more preferable. The edges of the bones are a little sharper, and I can see a little bit more detail of the internal structures of bone. I'm not quite sure why they didn't do side-by-side comparison using the exact same kilovolt and milliamps. Today I talked to you about single source versus multiple source. Remember that Nanox has submitted only the single source Nanox Arc to the third-party FDA reviewer at the present time. So if this is the Arc and these are their X-ray tubes, they're only using a single source, just one X-ray beam. That is really not very clinically useful, although Rand did say later in his presentation that after the RSNA presentation in December of 2020, they did receive multiple requests for this single source Nanox Arc versus what they're trying to submit to the FDA, or will be submitting. It hasn't quite been submitted yet. Would be a multi-source image which provides multiple different X-ray beams and can do multiple different things rather than just provide an X-ray type image. And presented the timeline for Nanox. If you're interested in this, you can pause the video and take a look at the details. He showed what the medical imaging market looks like, about 21 billion. In the small pink circle, you can see the classic companies that are providing medical imaging, predominantly to medical imaging centers and hospitals. Nanox is not targeting those necessarily. They're targeting urgent care, outpatient clinics, and countries with limited medical imaging. Rand presented the medical screening as a service business model. Nanox will cover the capital expenditure for the machine. These facilities will commit to doing a minimum of 7 scans per day. At 20 scans per day, they stand to make $397 million in recurring revenues. They estimate, though, that they can get to 60 scans per day, and then they're looking at $1.192 billion annually. Right now, as it stands, Nanox has a little more than 5,000 current contracts to install these systems. Of course, that is all depending on medical clearance for the use of their device. All right, here's what most of you are probably tuning in for, the FDA clearance. What is the status on that? Well, Rand covered again what we already know, that the 510K application was submitted to a third-party reviewer back in January of 2020. In March of 2020, the reviewer came back with some additional information requests. They have since responded to that as of September 2020. That, again, was just for the single-source Nanox ARC. What we don't know is if the third-party reviewer has sent that on to the FDA yet. Let's just quickly take a look at what this FDA clearance process looks like for a 510K review. So this process looks like this. A person submits the 510K paperwork to the FDA. By day 7, the FDA acknowledges that they have received that and sends an indication of that. By day 15, the FDA conducts an acceptance review. This would be one process where they can kick out a lot of things that they don't see merits for in clearing this as 510K and could potentially place it on an RTA hold. By day 60, they plan to complete the substantive review, where the FDA will inform the submitter that the FDA will either proceed with interactive review of that 510K submission, or they place it on hold for additional information. The hold process allows for up to 180 days before the submitter responds. Those days are not counted within this timeline. By day 90, the FDA aims to send a final decision on the 510K. If they can't get that out by day 100, then they will communicate that to the submitter and have a conference where they can identify any outstanding issues. I was curious just how long this FDA clearance process can take. This is from Qualio.com, where they talk about Class 2 devices, and they say that the average length of time is 177 days. Just 19% of those submissions are cleared within 3 months. They didn't talk about the average radiology time for clearance, but they did say that anesthesiology devices have the longest approval time at 245 days. Now, this was as December of 2019. Those dates or time frame may have changed. Now, the important thing that I was listening for, and Rand said this at least twice, the multi-source Nanox ARC 510K has not been submitted yet. And as best I can tell, Nanox has not done the CE submission. The CE mark is necessary to sell your medical device within the European Union. Rand discussed their global partnerships going on. You can see some of them here. The interesting one that I heard in his presentation was Fuji. He said that Fuji would be using the Nanox technology. I understand that to mean that they would use the X-ray tube, the one that costs roughly $100 for their mammography equipment. I really think still that this is where Nanox can make a lot of money, is by figuring out how to license their X-ray tube technology to other companies. About their advisory board, many of these are well-respected people in the field of medical imaging, and for the next video that I do, we'll talk about what some of these experts have to say about the Nanox technology. How'd the market respond to Mr. Polyakin's presentation today? Well, Nanox started around 55 on the day, made it almost to 56, and then has tumbled as low as just shy of $51. It's since made a little bit of a comeback. So overall, you might assume that they weren't very impressed with his presentation. However, you can see over the past 5 days that the Nanox stock price has been undulating up and down anyway. I guess the good thing out of this is that it didn't plummet. So where do we stand on this? We know that Nanox has not yet received FDA clearance for their single-source Nanox ARC device. I was looking through the FDA website. They did say that generally the 510 clearances for the preceding month are on their website by the 5th of the month. So one day to look forward to would be February 5th to see if the Nanox ARC is going to show up there. Though I would assume that if it does get cleared, that Nanox will announce that even before the 5th of the month. What else do I have in store for you? Well, my next video again will cover what the medical imaging experts have to say about Nanox's technology. Again, these are well-respected people in the medical imaging field. And then a future video that I also have for you will cover some of this technology. Again, we don't know the exact details on how Nanox manufactures this tiny little chip that we saw, but I can show you that at least one other company is using some similar technology that has already been FDA cleared. It's a cold cathode device, and they are using it in their X-ray equipment at the present time. All right, time for the mandatory give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. And again, we'd love to have you as a subscriber. And until next time, enjoy your investing.